Gorton Center was perfectly situated at NBR because it upholds the same values of rigorous analysis, intellectual pursuit, integrity, and effectiveness that Slade embodied. And it allowed him to pursue a lot of the policy and intellectual issues that he wanted to under that rubric. In 2013, the GLP was started. And that Gorton Leaders Program has been amazing. It has allowed us at the Gorton Center to introduce young students to leadership opportunities. Slade would ask and invite some of his friends and colleagues to come in and talk about leadership at all levels. And Slade also really wanted to get people into civil discussions and to continue the Socratic method that he loved. Slade said that my greatest legacy will not be any particular legislation, but the hundreds of young people who have worked with me over the years and who have gone on to become leaders themselves.
Women lawyers at that point couldn't find jobs in the private sector. Slade decided that he was going to put the welcome mat out. Wasn't that all that long thereafter that the office was about half women, and Slade set a national record and reputation for having done so. His opening of the door to women assistant attorneys general is close to me because I'm one of the recipients. A brand new graduate gets a call from the attorney general inviting them to be a part of the team at the attorney general's office. It launched my career. Who would have ever thought back then that one day I would be the Attorney General? But you know, that relationship we established then evolved into not just admiration and respect on my part, but a friendship. And so the Gorton Center brought us back together again. He decided he'd take all that leadership and he'd pay it forward, and he'd create the leaders of tomorrow.
Slade had a picture on his wall, and he would ask you, what do you think this picture is? And I didn't guess it correctly, but it turned out to be the Great Fire of London. And I think the lesson in there was how nations always rebuild. It doesn't matter what happens. If it's something that suddenly destroys your city overnight, nations are always going to rebuild. And that lesson is great. I think for 2020, there's a lot of pessimism and there's a lot of people saying that they're not hopeful for the future. And I think we have to remember that lesson. At the end of the day, nations are always going to rebuild, but without Slade around, they just might take a little longer.
I have thought about what Slade taught me about leadership. He demonstrated that true leaders find ways to contribute regardless of their position, because advancing not themselves, but something that's greater than themselves is part of who they are. Slade lived that commitment by teaching students to explore the multiple aspects of critical issues and how to master material, by demonstrating that quiet strength can be exercised effectively with civility, and by promoting an understanding that true leaders are principled and committed to higher callings. He wanted his legacy to be the rise of a new generation of leaders who are committed to intellectual honesty and curiosity, who forged strength and determination with civility, and who were tethered to principles and to community and country. Slade's legacy will not be measured by courtroom or legislative or campaign victories. Slade's legacy will be measured by how well we carry his torch and by how well in our time we pass it on.
Slade was innately curious. He was a genuine intellectual and a lifelong learner. For as many questions as I had for him, he had at least one or two for me. In fact, when I had asked him which piece of legislation he felt proudest of during that meeting, he shared with me that it was the Chinese Student Protection Act. And while I didn't recognize it at the time, more than 3 years after that meeting, I learned that this legislation was actually a key part of my family's immigration story and why my parents were able to stay in the United States and start a life here. Slade assembled a group of students in the Seattle area with a wide diversity of perspectives who could be found on both the conservative and the liberal ends of the political spectrum and just about everywhere in between. Slade would later tell our class of fellows that there was an order in which he considered policy matters. 1, is it the right thing to do? 2, does it represent the greatest number of people with a stake in this issue? And 3, is it politically smart? He stated that too often people in power considered policy issues in the opposite direction of this order, and that advice continues to resonate with me today.
Slade had a tremendous life and leaves us a tremendous legacy of bipartisanship and civil discourse. This country needs a tidal wave of young Slade Gortons. And I'm going to take one moment of your time to ask you to consider contributing to keep Slade's legacy alive and going through the Gorton Center.